Have you ever thought about how a medicine, let's say developed in like Germany, ends up on a pharmacy shelf in, I don't know, Australia or Canada?
Yeah, it is
And
fascinating.
it's this huge web of regulations and standards
Right.
that make that happen,
Yeah.
making sure that what you're taking is safe and effective no matter where it was made. So today, we're diving deep into that world,
Okay.
looking specifically at how these international regulatory bodies approach the whole business of clinical trial regulation.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I think it's really interesting because you have this kind of global aspiration
Right.
for safe and effective medicines,
Of course.
but then the practicalities on the ground,
Uh-huh.
the legal systems,
Yeah.
the healthcare infrastructures, they look quite different
Totally.
from one continent to the next.
Yeah.
So how do organizations like the European Medicines Agency, the EMA, how do they navigate all of this?
Exactly. And how do they work with all the other international players in this space?
Right.
So think of this deep dive as your shortcut to understanding
Okay.
how those global rules of the road are being established,
Yeah.
primarily through something called ICH harmonization.
Oh, yes.
We'll also pinpoint where those regional quirks still exist.
Yeah, that's important.
And crucially, what all this means if you were involved in, or even just curious about,
Right.
those massive clinical trials that span multiple countries.
Those multinational studies.
Huge.
Huge.
Exactly. Huge. So whether you're prepping for a meeting on international regulations,
Okay.
trying to get a handle on the field,
Mhm.
or just have that healthy dose of curiosity, we're aiming to give you some really clear insights.
Sounds good.
So we'll be drawing on the rule books themselves, so like the regulatory documents,
Yeah.
practical guides like the ICH guidelines,
Yeah.
and some of those expert perspectives that we've gleaned. So our mission
Lay it on me.
to take this somewhat dense area
Sure.
and make those key insights crystal clear. What do you think?
Love it.
Yeah.
Let's start with this idea of building bridges. You hear a lot about the International Council for Harmonization, the ICH.
Right.
What exactly is its role in trying to create a unified global approach?
Yeah, so the ICH is really that engine driving the creation of those global standards in our field.
Okay.
It brings together those regulatory powerhouses, Europe, Japan, the US,
Huge players.
huge players, and crucially, the pharmaceutical industry itself.
Right.
So the fundamental goal
Yeah.
is to get everyone on the same page
Right.
when it comes to the technical requirements for developing and registering new medicines.
So why is that harmonization so important? What's the real payoff?
I mean, imagine a pharmaceutical company trying to bring a new cancer drug to market globally.
Okay. Yeah.
If every region had completely different rules
Right.
for how they had to conduct their clinical trials, what kind of data they need to submit, it would be
Yeah.
a nightmare. Incredibly time-consuming and expensive.
For sure.
They might have to run multiple sets of studies. Harmonization streamlines all of that.
I see. Yeah.
It means less duplication of effort.
Right.
It also allows regulatory agencies in different parts of the world to have greater confidence
Yeah.
in each other's decisions
Makes sense.
because the underlying data has been generated to that common standard.
Right. So it's about creating that baseline
Yes.
of quality and rigor that everyone can trust. Now, one of our sources mentioned this ICH E6R3 draft guideline
Yes.
on good clinical practice, or GCP. What's so important about this one?
Well, the E6 guideline, that's essentially like the ethical and scientific compass for how clinical trials should be designed, conducted, recorded, and reported.
Okay.
It's all about protecting the rights and safety of the people participating in these trials.
Of course, yeah.
And then ensuring the integrity of that data. The fact that the latest draft, R3,
Uh-huh.
is aligning closely with the FDA's current thinking, that's not just a minor update. This signifies a growing global consensus on these core ethical principles and scientific standards.
And that can really help in leveraging clinical trial data across different countries for new therapies.
Exactly.
And it's not just about running the trials themselves, is
Yeah.
it? The ICHQ series guidelines, those also play a vital role. What do those focus on?
Yeah, so the Q series dives into the quality aspects of medicines.
Okay.
I mean, think about it. You need to ensure not just that a drug works and is safe,
Right.
but also that every batch
Yeah.
is manufactured to the same high standard no matter where in the world it's made.
I see.
So, for example, Q3C, that sets acceptable limits for residual solvents,
Okay.
those trace amounts of chemicals that might be left over from the manufacturing process.
Right, right. So like about kind of impurities and things like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you have Q11, which provides guidance on selecting and justifying the starting materials used to make that active ingredient in the drug.
Okay.
So these guidelines are foundational for ensuring consistent quality in pharmaceutical manufacturing globally.
So from the initial components all the way to the final product,
Yeah.
there are harmonized quality expectations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that consistency extends to how the results of those clinical trials
Okay.
are presented to those regulatory
Oh,
agencies.
six.
So ICH-E3 specifies that structure and content of clinical study reports.
Got it.
So when a company submits the findings of a trial, regulators in Europe, the US, or Japan,
Yeah.
they'll all be looking at a report that's organized in a similar way,
Right.
making that review process much more efficient and allowing for easier comparison of the data.
That makes sense. Now, when it comes to demonstrating that a drug actually works,
Right.
are there ICH guidelines addressing that aspect as well?
Yes. So ICH-E4 provides recommendations on how to design and analyze dose-response studies.
Oh, okay.
These studies are critical for figuring out the right amount of a drug needed
Uh-huh.
to have that desired therapeutic effect while minimizing those potential side effects.
Yeah, the risk-benefit. Yeah.
Exactly. Having harmonized guidance here
Yeah.
ensures that drug approvals are based on solid evidence of efficacy,
Right.
determined through those well-designed studies.
Solid science behind it.
Yeah.
And of course, patient safety is paramount.
Of course.
Does the ICH provide kind of a unified approach to safety evaluations?
Absolutely. The ICHS series focuses on safety testing.
Okay.
Good example is S5R3, which outlines a harmonized approach to reproductive toxicology testing,
Okay.
essentially assessing if a drug could potentially harm fertility or cause developmental issues.
Right. Really important.
Really important. By aligning these safety tests, the ICH aims to ensure a consistent level of safety scrutiny across those different regulatory regions.
Yeah. It seems like the ICH's reach is so broad, covering almost every facet of drug development.
It is?
I even recall them mentioning an M series. What kind of topics fall under that?
Yeah, so the M series deals with those more multidisciplinary areas.
Okay.
For instance, ICH M12 looks at drug interaction studies.
Mm-hmm.
It even discusses the use of advanced techniques like physiologically based pharmacokinetic or PBPK modeling to predict how different drugs might interact in the body. It's like creating a virtual map of the body
Oh, wow.
where we can see how a drug moves through different, I like to call them neighborhoods,
Yeah.
the organs, the tissues,
Yeah.
and how they interact with other medications in those areas before we even test it in a person. It shows how ICH is also incorporating that cutting-edge science into its guidelines.
That's fascinating. And going back to quality for a moment,
Okay.
ICH-Q9 on quality risk management, that seems particularly relevant in today's complex landscape.
It does.
Yeah.
So ICH-Q9, that provides a framework and tools for a systematic approach to identifying, assessing, and controlling those potential quality risks
Right.
throughout the entire life cycle of a drug product.
Oh, wow.
It's all about being proactive rather than reactive when it
Mhm.
comes to quality.
Yeah.
And the fact that those regulatory authorities worldwide have adopted this guideline
Right.
really promotes a consistent mindset and approach to managing those quality risks.
So when you put it all together, what's that overarching impact of all these ICH harmonization efforts?
So as the FDA's Clinical Investigator Training Course transcript highlighted,
Yeah.
ICH's work really fosters a much greater level of consistency
Okay.
in how different regulatory agencies approach drug review and approval.
Right.
It can also improve how inspections are conducted globally
Makes sense.
as agencies gain more confidence in each other's standards.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it reduces a lot of that redundant effort
Mm-hmm.
and helps to ensure that high-quality medicines can reach patients around the world
Right.
more efficiently. We also saw them mention ICHE16 on genomic biomarkers,
Yes.
which aims to standardize how companies apply to have these biomarkers qualified for use in drug development across those different regions.
Yeah.
That's so crucial for the advancement of personalized medicine.
Okay, so the ICH is that central coordinating body. But let's look at the individual players, those regional regulatory agencies themselves.
Yeah.
Let's focus on the EMA, the European Medicines Agency. What's its role in this big global picture?
So the EMA, that's the central regulatory authority for the European Union.
Okay.
Its job is to scientifically evaluate those medicines developed by pharmaceutical companies
Right?
and decide whether they can be marketed and used in the EU.
Okay, yeah.
It performs a similar function to the FDA in the United States,
I see.
ensuring the safety, efficacy, and quality of medicines.
Got it.
While their overall goals are aligned,
Yeah.
there can be some distinct differences in their approaches and those specific requirements.
Oh, interesting. Can you give us an example of where those regional differences might emerge?
Sure.
Mm.
One area where we sometimes see variations is in the specifics of good manufacturing practice, or GMP.
Yep.
For example, the EU GMP Annex 1
Uh,
has a very detailed and formal set of requirements around contamination control in manufacturing facilities,
right.
while the FDA also has stringent GMP regulations.
Yeah.
Under 21 CFR Parts 210 and 211, the specific emphasis and the way these requirements are documented and implemented can differ.
I see.
It's not about one being stricter than the other,
Right.
but rather different ways of ensuring those medicines are produced to the highest quality standards.
Yeah.
These differences often reflect different historical priorities or ways of assessing and mitigating risks in manufacturing.
So even with those overarching ICH guidelines,
Right.
pharmaceutical companies still need to be very aware of these regional nuances.
Absolutely. While ICH provides that common foundation,
Yeah.
that practical application and the finer details can vary. For instance, as we discussed earlier, both the EMA and FDA conduct good clinical practice, or GCP, inspections
Right.
to ensure that those clinical trials are conducted ethically
Oh.
and produce reliable data.
Yes.
The FDA CITC Day 3 transcript touches on this.
Yeah, I remember that.
However, those specific areas of focus during an inspection
Right.
or the particular documentation they might scrutinize.
Could have those regional variations. Sponsors need to be prepared for those subtle but important differences.
It sounds like navigating this regulatory landscape requires both an understanding of those global standards
Yes.
and then a keen awareness of those local rules.
Totally.
This must have a huge impact on how those multinational clinical studies are conducted.
It does. Nowadays, it's increasingly common for a single clinical trial
Right.
to enroll participants in many different countries simultaneously.
Oh, wow.
So what do you think are some of those key challenges
Yeah.
that arise when you're trying to run a trial across such a diverse regulatory landscape?
I think the main one is just the complexity.
Okay.
You're dealing with all sorts of different regulatory requirements, different ethical review board processes,
Right.
even cultural and logistical differences in how healthcare is delivered and research is conducted.
Yeah.
This can really increase the complexity and cost of bringing new medicines to market.
So how does that ICH framework help to simplify this process for those multinational trials?
Well, it provides a common set of principles and guidelines that simplifies many aspects of conducting global trials.
Wow.
For example, the ICH E6 guideline on GCP
Yeah.
establishes a consistent ethical and scientific framework for how those trials should be run,
Right.
regardless of where they're taking place. This means that those fundamental standards for protecting participants and ensuring that data integrity are largely the same across those regions
I
that
know
have
that.
adopted ICH guidelines,
Yeah.
which can streamline the development of the trial protocol
Makes sense.
and that required documentation.
But given that those regional variations still exist,
Right.
how do sponsors of these multinational trials
Yeah.
navigate those differences?
They need to have a very detailed understanding of those specific regulatory requirements in each country
Right.
where they plan to conduct the trial. Even in areas where ICH provides guidance,
Yeah.
local regulations might have additional requirements or slightly different interpretations. For example, while those core principles of GMP are similar in the US, 21 CFR Part 211,
Right.
in Europe, EU GMP,
Mhm.
there might be specific details related to facility design, equipment validation, or cleaning procedures that a multinational study needs to address to satisfy all those relevant regulatory authorities.
Wow.
It's about knowing both the forest, the
Wow.
ICH guidelines, and the trees,
Yeah.
the local regulations.
I love that analogy, and I can imagine that meticulous record keeping and documentation
Yeah.
become even more crucial in these international studies.
Absolutely. Good documentation practices, or GDP, need to be consistently applied across all those sites involved in a multinational trial.
Right.
This ensures that that data generated is reliable and meets the standards of all the regulatory bodies that will eventually review it. Principles like LCOA, attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, and accurate. Those are fundamental in maintaining data integrity across all those participating countries, as we often hear in those discussions around data quality.
So when regulatory agencies like the FDA or the EMA conduct inspections of these multinational trials, how does that work?
They have the authority to conduct inspections of those clinical trial sites, both within their own borders
Okay.
and internationally,
Wow.
to ensure compliance with GCP, as mentioned in those FDA CITC transcripts. They want to be certain that that data collected from all the participating sites is trustworthy,
Yeah.
and that the rights and well-being of those trial participants have been protected, regardless of where that research is being conducted.
So what are those potential consequences if they find significant issues during these inspections?
Non-compliance in those multinational studies can have serious repercussions, as highlighted in the discussions around FDA warning letters. And inspection findings, the 483s in the FDA CITC Day 3 transcript
Right.
issues, can lead to delays in the drug approval process, requests for more data,
Yeah.
or even more severe regulatory actions that could impact the drug's availability in multiple markets.
Wow.
It really underscores that critical importance of thorough planning and strict adherence to both international and local regulations.
So the big picture seems to be that while ICH has made incredible progress in harmonizing global standards for clinical trials,
Yeah.
successfully conducting these trials across multiple countries still demands a really nuanced and in-depth understanding
Yeah.
of the specific regulatory environment in each region involved.
Absolutely. It's a constant balancing act between adhering to those global guidelines
Right.
and meeting those specific local requirements.
This has been an incredibly insightful journey into those complexities
It has been.
of international clinical trial regulation. To bring it all together for our listeners, could you summarize those key takeaways for us?
Certainly. We've explored that pivotal role of the International Council for Harmonization, or ICH, in establishing those global standards,
Yeah.
which offers huge benefits in terms of efficiency and confidence for both regulators and the industry. We've also examined how those key regional regulatory bodies, like the EMA, operate,
Right.
and that despite ICH's efforts, those important regional differences in regulatory requirements still exist.
Yeah.
Finally, we've highlighted that profound impact these regulations have on the design and execution of multinational clinical studies,
Right.
emphasizing that critical need for sponsors to effectively navigate both that harmonized global framework and the specific nuances of local regulations.
It's clear that ensuring the safety and effectiveness of medicines in our increasingly interconnected world
Yeah.
is a challenging but absolutely vital undertaking.
I agree.
It's reassuring to know that these international collaborations and those dedicated regulatory bodies are working to achieve that goal.
Indeed, and it prompts an important question to consider. As research and development becomes even more globally integrated,
Yeah.
how will international regulatory collaboration continue to evolve? What new challenges and opportunities might emerge as the world of drug development becomes even more interconnected and interdependent?
That's definitely a thought-provoking question.
Yeah.
For anyone listening who wants to delve deeper into this fascinating area, where would you suggest they start their exploration?
I would recommend going directly to the source, the ICH website,
Okay.
to explore those various guidelines. Additionally, the websites of those specific regulatory agencies, like the FDA for the United States and the EMA for Europe, they offer a wealth of information on their respective regulations and approaches.
Excellent recommendations.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the international regulatory perspectives on clinical trials. It's been incredibly enlightening.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And thank you, all of you, for tuning in to the deep dive. We hope this has shed some light on this complex
Yeah.
but crucial aspect of bringing new medicines to the world.
Right.
Until our next deep dive, take care.